Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Timothy Gondola, and I'm a classically trained pianist who's now dabbling into jazz and gospel and just trying to branch out into anything new I can get my fingers onto. I'm a piano teacher. I teach at Meridian Music in Carmel. I also teach at Butler piano lessons. And the main thing that I do is I run an online business through my website that involves mostly music transcription. So people will hire me to transcribe pieces for them. I also do a little bit of arranging, just kind of any type of notation based something that somebody might want. So I am kind of an Indianapolis native in the sense that I grew up here, but I was born in New York. My family moved around a bit when I was a kid. And by the age of 5, I settled into Indianapolis, went to the international school on Michigan Road. And yeah, ever since an early age, I've been learning piano. Since age 4, my mom started me on the piano. She was a gospel pianist. She played for church and led choirs and stuff when she was a kid. And so she started me and my older brother on the piano, and we formally started taking lessons just a year after that. So I think at that point I was 5. I took a couple years of lessons, and then I changed teachers with Jackie Murphy is her name. And so she's the person that I stuck with all through elementary school, basically all of grade school until graduation. When I was a kid, when you learn piano, you're just kind of learning the basics. The direction we went in after that was classical, so it was really focused on classical repertoire and kind of getting deep into classical culture. So that is the musical culture that I come from. And even in my family, we're very steeped in classical. Like my dad is a huge classical music fan. He has actually the entire collection of everything Mozart has ever composed. It's like 130 CDs. So that's the environment that I grew up in and that I developed in as a musician. And I really didn't have too much exposure to that many other types of music. I mean, jazz was actually the other genre with the least exposure I had. We had some African music that I was exposed to because my family's from Congo. A little bit of gospel, but it was really just classical. And so I went to school in Minnesota at McAllister College, and it was there where I quite literally discovered jazz. I was just on YouTube and I started seeing these videos of Art Tatum, who is one of the top jazz pianists from the 20th century, Oscar Peterson, and I had just never heard the piano played in that way. So I was just mesmerized, really, and what I wanted to do was be able to play what they were playing. But I had no idea how to get started doing that, so what I discovered was transcriptions. So transcriptions are basically when somebody listens to a piece of music. So let's say there's a piano piece, somebody hears it, and then they notate every single note and create a sheet music for that. So I discovered some of these transcriptions for these jazz solos and jazz pieces, and that is how I got into the jazz world, and I started learning these jazz pieces as if it was a classical score. So I kind of jumped the gun in my experience with jazz because I didn't start from the foundation of like learning jazz scales, bebop stuff and how to improvise. I just kind of learned the notes of very complex solos and lines and all that. So I had the impression to other people that I was a very proficient jazz pianist. So at McAllister, some people heard me playing and they urged me to get in the jazz band, and I did. And that was 2013. So 2013 was really the start of my entry into jazz when I entered the jazz band. So since then, I've really just been pursuing jazz, learning how to improvise. And so I think that dual experience that I have from the classical world and the jazz world is a really interesting combination, because I took all that dexterity and that theory knowledge and just like advanced musicianship from my classical days, and then when you apply that to jazz, you're already learning at a high level. But then on the other hand, I have to go and relearn all these foundational jazz theory concepts, and that's something that I continue to work on to this day. I'm kind of try to expand my understanding of the foundations for blues and for jazz and bebop and all that stuff. So yeah, that's kind of my musical story in a nutshell. I think when I create music at this point, I can't necessarily pinpoint the genre that it would be, whether it would be something more classical or jazz. I think I just kind of infuse whatever sound I like into my music, specifically my composition that I released this summer called The Albatross. It's got kind of a classical vibe to it, but there's definitely a lot of jazz harmonies and reharmonies. Actually, one of my favorite genres is Brazilian jazz. And so there's kind of some Brazilian jazz chord progressions and harmonies that I've also weaved through there. Yeah, so that's kind of my story, where I've come from musically and how it's influenced me and the music that I put out now. So if you'd like to check out some of my music, you can go to my website. It's timothygondola.com. And if you go to the music page, there's an assortment of videos and just different recordings I've released in the past few years. And you can also find my music and my transcription work through YouTube. So I release a couple videos on YouTube, mostly transcriptions that I've done. Also, I arrange certain jazz pieces or hymns, and I put that out there too. And lastly, I also have a Patreon page which supports my YouTube channel, and I'm using that kind of as a funding. So that's my story, and that's what I'm up to. I appreciate you guys listening.